Hello, Karen here from Soul Symbols Astrology. Welcome everyone. Welcome back if you've been there before. If not, you're really welcome here. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to me. It's lovely. So this week's astrology, I'm looking at the chart from Monday, the 4th of May through to next Sunday. And what I want to focus on is two major squares, and they're kind of shaping the atmosphere of this week. So the first is Mars in Aries, and that is building its superior square to Jupiter in Cancer. And the second is exact on Tuesday, the 5th of May, and it's Pluto in Aquarius making a superior square to Mercury in Taurus. So with squares, there's tension and it's bringing a lot of pressure into the sky this week, but it's not all of the same kind. Mars and Jupiter are bringing heat, conviction, action, protection, and the possibility of emotional overreach we need to be aware of. And Mercury and Pluto are bringing that depth, intensity, speech, thought, power, and the uncovering of what is sitting under the surface, both individually and collectively. But what really caught my eye as I looked at the chart and the transits for the week is Mercury is woven through both of these squares, both by the bound and the decan, the face of Mercury. So it is a week of action, feeling power and pressure. But it's also a week of language, narrative, interpretation and meaning. What we say and what is said really matters this week, and how things are framed will be important this week. So those stories that we tell ourselves and others and the general narrative may be carrying more force than usual. So in this week's episode, I want to slow the chart down and look at what these two squares might be asking of us, both collectively and personally. So what I would like to do at this point is to bring up the chart so we can have a quick visual look at the sky for this week. Okay, let's do that. Here we are. What I want to draw your eye to are the two pressure points that are really shaping this week. So here we have Mars in Aries. So Mars is in his own sign here. So he has strength, heat, direction, momentum, movement. And if I move across the chart, we can see Mars forming this square to Jupiter in Cancer. And Jupiter is also strong because he's exalted in Cancer. So this is a strong square. Both planets have got power in the signs they're occupying. So this gives a very vivid tension between Aries and Cancer. So that action and protection and personal will and our emotional attachment. So we can have that impulse to move forward and an instinct to preserve, defend, or care for something precious here with the Jupiter in Cancer. But what is especially interesting is that Mars here is in the bound of Mercury and the decan in the face of the sun. It's the decan of the sun. So that action is not just physical or impulsive as Mars in Aries can be. So it may come through speech or strategy and through decision making, ours or outside of us, declarations and visible displays of will here. So Jupiter in Cancer here is in its own bound here. See here, but it's in the face, the decan of Mercury. So again, Mercury's present. So the emotional or protective Jupiterian impulse here in Cancer is also being carried through language, belief, explanation, or story. So even with this fiery emotional Mars-Jupiter square, we're already seeing that importance of words and narratives and how things are being framed here. Then if we look to the other major square of the week, here we have Mercury You can see why I think Mercury is a thread. And it's quite new in Taurus. And Mercury is receiving a superior square from Pluto in Aquarius. This is exact on the 5th. Let's move the chart. There we go. That's an exact square there. So Mercury here in Taurus, it's got that Taurus emphasis. So it's thinking slowly, practically, and in the material. Okay. So Mercury is wanting something real here in Taurus, something material. So Mercury will be trying to make sense of value, resources, our bodies, money, and definitely stability. So Mercury's looking for what can actually be trusted here. And then we have this Pluto in Aquarius, applying pressure down in the superior position. But it's coming from the collective field. It's Aquarius. Pluto is in Aquarius. So systems, networks can be the technology as well. Technology is connected with Aquarius. We're also looking at ideology and groupthink. So the deeper power structures that are moving through society as a whole. So visually, we can see this fixed square. They're both fixed signs, Taurus and Aquarius. Mercury is in the bound of Venus here. It's the Egyptian terms, and in the face, the decan of Mercury. While Pluto here is in the bound of Mercury in the decan face of Venus here. So again, Mercury is strongly involved, but we've got Venus woven in here. So we're looking at questions of value, attachment, relationship. We can also be looking at money and beauty. So we're looking again at what we're trying to preserve or stabilize. So before we even go deeper into the architecture of these squares, the archetypes and the symbolism, we've got a chart here that's already shown us something very clearly. This is a week where the pressure is not only about the action, it's about speech, meaning, interpretation, information, and the stories that gather power around us. Let's get you back. Here we are. So with that visual map in our minds, let's begin with Mars in Aries, building its superior square to Jupiter in Cancer. So the overall atmosphere of this chart, we've got a great deal of fire and fixedness in this chart. There's the Mars in Aries, so he's very much in his own ground. And Mercury, having just entered Taurus, there's thought there wanting substance, weight, something grounded and steady, something that we can really hold on to here. Then we have Jupiter in Cancer, which is strong by exaltation. So we'll find amplification of feeling, urges to protect, belong and care. So it's that desire to nourish and preserve what matters. Then the Pluto in Aquarius, a fixed sign, is continuing to work at the level of collective systems. So the ideology, networks and deep social transformations really here. So overall, the week has a feeling of pressure between assertion and protection, personal will without emotional need, and grounded thought with collective intensity. So it's about what feels real and embodied versus what feels ideologically charged or system driven. So the Mars in Aries, building that superior square to Jupiter in Cancer, it's a strong square because both of the planets have got real presence here. Mars in Aries in his own domicile. So Mars here is direct, hot, he brings heat, decisive, immediate, and willing to act, can be impulsive. So he's not going to sit around and wait for very long for permission. So there's courage here, but we also need to look for signs of impatience or combativeness, and a tendency to move first and reflect later. And with that Mercury energy, this could be words. So we need to be aware of that tendency to do that. The Jupiter in Cancer, again, exalted. So Jupiter in Cancer is wanting to protect, feed, shelter, and grow whatever we find emotionally meaningful. So he'll be bringing expansion to our sense of care, memory, attachment, home family roots, that sort of home feel, and that instinct to defend what nourishes life. So this square can feel like a conflict in us or around us between that raw initiative of Aries and emotional protective with the Cancer. So Mars wanting the movement and decisive action, and Jupiter in Cancer wanting to preserve, hold, support, nurture, and ensure that safety in Cancer. So put together, this can produce a very emotionally charged sense of conviction. So people might not only be feeling that they're right, but that they must act because something precious is at stake. We can watch for those rhythms within us when they arise. They're archetypal rhythms, people. But Mars is in the overcoming sign. It's superior square. So it can feel as though that assertion, the conflict or any heat we're feeling or urgency are pressing down on Jupiter's softer, protective, containing impulse. So Mars may push Jupiter into overreaction, exaggeration, or defensiveness. And in turn, Jupiter can amplify Mars, making action larger, louder, more righteous, that righteousness, or giving emotional justification to those actions. So I talked in the chart about the bounds, the Egyptian bounds. We've got Mars at 18 degrees Aries, so that's in the bound of Mercury in the face of the Sun, and Jupiter at 19 degrees of Cancer in the bound of its own energy, Jupiter, and in the face of Mercury. So that is really interestingly, archetypally and symbolically, these are all planets, not just the planet, it's the architecture around it in the chart. So Mars in Mercury's bound in the Sun's face. So Mars in Aries is already forceful, but in Mercury's bounds, the martial energy becomes tactical, verbal, verbose, strategic, and very mentally active. So you may find that occurring for you through this week, kind of a mental activity. So we're talking about action that is shaped by ideas, arguments, messaging, and decision making. So we can give or receive sharp words. We might observe strategic maneuvering within us or around us, or argumentative thinking. So those narratives when you've got agitated, where you're having a will I do it? I'm sure a lot of you do it, where you're having a conversation that pushing your point in your mental space. But we can also experience impatience with speech here and the need to say something and do something now. So that impulse will be strong this week. And because it's in the face of the Sun, the decan of the Sun, Mars is going to be visible. So this may be public, okay, but it will be there'll be a sense of self-consciousness there, but also a need to make declarations. So what can we find with that? There can be pride, a strong will display, and that desire to act from the center of your own intention. So this gives Mars that public quality. It wants to be seen. That archetype wants to be seen acting publicly. So we need awareness around that. And we need compassion and empathy when we see that happening around us, to know those archetypes are pressing down here. There is that tension there. And then we come to the Jupiter it's in square with. Again, as I said, Jupiter in Cancer here is strong, and it's in its own bounds. So it has a certain integrity in the way it functions. So plainly put, Jupiter can do Jupiter things here. So enlarging, protecting, affirming, blessing, but really importantly, giving a depth of meaning. There's confidence in its own agenda here. Yet, being in that face of Mercury in the decan that's ruled by Mercury, again, it's bringing us back to communication and interpretation, language, ideas. So Jupiter's Cancerian instinct to care and preserve might be looking for expression through us, through speech, teaching, statements, beliefs, and persuasive narratives. In the collective, we need to look at those persuasive narratives and run it by our critical thinking faculties, okay? So the baseline is people might be speaking from feeling, loyalty, protectiveness, or defending what they hold dear. So again, if we hold that understanding of the archetypal and symbolic structure that is around us this week, we can hold it in a different way, a more compassionate way, perhaps. So this square is suggesting, because both sides of the square are touched by Mercury through bound or face, this Mars-Jupiter tension is likely to play out through debate. You may see debates or be in debate with someone, or declarations. So watch on the world stage for declarations, enlarged declarations. It can also play out through emotionally charged opinions and protective rhetoric. So we can have arguments here over what is right, safe, justified, but it's movement driven by belief or moral conviction. And this can be a really good thing, but it can also be a very shadowy, difficult thing. So we need to look at both the light and the dark of this, because it's always there. So it can be energizing and courageous. This energetic, this tension, I always think the squares are there for challenge and creative tension. So it can help push something forward for us, but we need to be aware that it can overheat quickly. Mars in Aries can become combative, and Jupiter in Cancer can become inflated. Okay, you can get an inflation through feeling or memory or that emotional identification. So together they can produce that mood of righteous action, where people are not just reacting, but acting from a sense of principle, protection, or mission. So a constructive expression would be bold action in service of care. On the other hand, the shadow expression could be an impulsive action that's justified by emotional certainty. So hold that awareness for yourself and for others around you, and it should be able to work out more harmoniously, perhaps. So now we move on to that second square, the Pluto in Aquarius in the superior, the pressing down square to Mercury in Taurus. This is exact on Tuesday, the 5th of May. That second square is going to shift the tone from the heat and action and into the realm of mind, meaning, communication, power. We can be looking at power, our power, the dynamics of power. But most importantly, psychological depth here. We've got an opportunity for that. So Mercury in Taurus is a fixed sign. You know, it's connected with the ball. Think of the image of the farmer trying to move the ball. Okay. So Mercury is thinking slowly here, and probably concretely and deliberately. So Mercury will be wanting facts it can feel and concerned with value, matter. We can look at the economy here in Taurus and the land, and that body and rhythm and what is stable enough for us to trust. So Mercury in Taurus won't just be quick just for the sake of speed. Mercury can be very fast moving, goes around the sun very fast. So Mercury in Taurus is looking more for coherence, steadiness, and that grounded point of view. So plug into that, really plug into that energetic. And then we've got that Pluto in Aquarius, again, a fixed sign. You've got that sense of fixedness here. And that's working because it's Aquarius at that level of collective systems, and it can be the hidden power within the social field. So we probably see a lot outside in terms of technological environments or the ideological structures. But also there's opportunities here for transformation through group processes, networks and emergent futures, things that we're visioning, the futures we want. Okay, there's a lot of energetic for that. So Pluto in Aquarius can expose what's buried inside the collective thinking and social organization around us. And because Pluto is in the overcoming square, it can really feel as though deep collective pressure is bearing down on Mercury's attempt to think clearly and steadily and have that earthed sense about it, that concrete sense about it, weighty. So our minds at this time can feel pressed. They can feel compelled and intensified or really confronted. So watch out for conversations that contain an element of obsessiveness, but also they can be revelatory. So be open to that as well. Information is going to have weight here, and language might uncover the things that have been hidden. So this is a time probably to read between the lines. Not talking paranoia, that can be that obsessive trait of it, but really listen. It's a week to really, really listen to what's being said in our own environments, but also wider in the collective social landscape. So we look at the bounds and faces again. We got Mercury at 2 degrees Taurus. At the start of this, that's the flavor of it. So he's in the Egyptian bounds of Venus and the face, his own decan of Mercury. And Pluto at 5 degrees of Aries is in the bound of Mercury in the face of Venus. Pluto's going to spend quite some time, and has been there for a while, at 5 degrees. So this is a good thing to make note of, because whatever gets into aspect with it, it's going to carry this Pluto at 5 degrees in those bounds and decans. Okay, so it's not just for this week, but it is that whole bounds and face decans and who rules them makes, for me, a beautifully interlocked pattern. Mercury in Venus's bounds, but in its own face, and Pluto in Mercury's bounds, but Venus's face. So we got just that lovely. I just think it's a beautiful interlaced pattern. So the aspect then becomes a really tight braid of Mercury and Venus symbolism, with Pluto intensifying the whole thing. So Mercury in Taurus is already speaking in a grounded way. As I said, it's seeking weighted speech and expression that holds weight. But in Venus's bound, the mind is shaped by value, aesthetics. It's relational, so we can think about attraction and that desire for harmony and coherence. So our thoughts, individually and collectively, might be circling around what matters and feels worthwhile. It can also be around what we love and what we feel attached to. There's also the topics of money and resources and our personal relationship and priorities to that. It also speaks very deeply about the body's intelligence. So yeah, you could probably this week push into some natic practices, breath, having your feet on the ground, really listening to the body, listening to your inner life. It's a good time for that now. But there's also, with all this, that it very Taurus, that need for peace and simplicity here. So in its own face, Mercury strengthened in its own nature. It just means the archetypal symbolism of it is strong. So there's clarity available here, or at least a desire for clarity. Mercury is being fully Mercury here. So the mind wants to name things properly, sort them out, articulate them cleanly. But in Taurus, there'll be a care with that, and there could be a complete stubbornness with that. And then Pluto in Mercury's bound and Venus's face. Pluto's not a traditional planet. It wasn't in the Hellenistic framework, but it wasn't discovered then. But its degree condition is still giving us the symbolism to work with. So in Mercury's bound, Pluto is channeling its depth compulsion and exposing force through that mercurial terrain. So what does this mean in practice? It can show and bring penetrating thought, or alternatively fixation on certain ideas and compulsive discourse. But it can bring revelations with hidden information surfacing that may come out with an intensity in our media. So look outwardly, look what's going on in the media. It's going to show up this week, I believe. But it can also come out, it can also express itself through our speech, writing, the announcements we make or hear, and an interpretation of those. So in the face of Venus, Pluto's Aquarian force will probably be seen in something that's relational, attractive, persuasive, or socially magnetic. The pressure's not necessarily going to arrive looking harsh. It may arrive through what we find appealing, maybe even fashionable, socially endorsed, or wrapped up in values language. What's worth noticing this week? How can we observe these archetypes at work? This Mercury-Pluto square can bring things this week, such as intense conversation or pressures around narratives. It can bring truth-telling or forced disclosure. So again, this pattern keeps arising, and I think it's very much in the collective, that truth-telling or forced disclosure. It can also bring, I've mentioned before, obsessive thinking or mental strain, but also ideological confrontation can happen here. So we may see where people collectively as a group have got very strong ideological bases. There may be a grinding and confronting and challenging in that way. And also we'll see Pluto's to do with power. So we'll have a sense of the power dynamics in our communication and others' communication. And there can be a friction between lived reality and collective abstractions. So being very clear in our own mind as we approach this week is going to be really helpful for us. But we can fall back down to that Mercury in Taurus and that instinct to say, stay grounded, practical, and anchored in what's real and tangible. So with Pluto in Aquarius, there's that pressure from the collective field, from systems or future orientated ideas. And I think Pluto in Aquarius is bringing a lot of that technological futures. So there may be pressure coming to us from those realms, but also from the social currents. So from the larger impersonal pattern that we swim in, really. One expression of this square could be the body and common sense saying one thing while the collective atmosphere demands another. That's where the tension, I believe, is going to come. So it can also show those deeper confrontation between stable values and radical transformation. And that, this is a good thing because Aquarius is a sign. It's ruled by Saturn, but it looks back to tradition. It embodies and holds that tradition that you get from Capricorn, really, but it also looks forward. So that confrontation, that tension can be really creative between the stable values and a radical transformation. There can be a middle ground found there. But Pluto will be asking Mercury to go deeper than surface explanations. And Mercury in Taurus might be resisting that at first, preferring the known, the tested, what's materially real, feet on the ground energy. But Pluto will be pushing and pressuring and insisting that something underneath the story is being exposed. Okay, so you may find material coming up that you feel resistant to. Okay, but it's there for transformation. Just invite it in. I've got this saying by Rumi about inviting everything in onto your doormat just invite it, embrace it, and sit with it and let it work through you this week. Pluto is fantastic if you don't resist some of those intense energies, just to sit with, commune with him, commune with Lord of the Underworld. And it's really helpful for breakthroughs and for just, having a deeper insight into things. But overall, what I said at the beginning that I find really interesting about this week is that Mercury woven through all of the tensions. So even though one square is fiery, that Mars, Jupiter, and the other is psychological, the Pluto, Mercury, both are suggesting a week that can be lived through our language and decisions, discourse. It can be lived through announcements or interpretation. Storytelling may be really strong here. So any of you working with story, writing story, or working with it psychologically, beautiful week for it. And also in our mental framing, that can be lived. We can live through our mental framing of things. Good time to get organized mentally in that sense, and more stable. Sometimes stability comes through intensity or intense moments, but we can find that stability there. So this could be a week where the stories that are being told, the narratives, what we're hearing and how they are being interpreted matter enormously. Okay. It's just, that's the archetypal landscape there. So Mars square Jupiter is saying that the speech can become heated, morally charged or protective, and Mercury square Pluto is saying speech can become intense, probing, revealing, or coercive. We do need to look out for that coercion. One of the central takeaways from this week could be that sense that there's a great deal of conviction in the sky, and as above, so below. It'll be mirrored in our psyches, but that conviction doesn't always automatically equal clarity. We've got that Mars in Aries that can act really quickly. Jupiter in Cancer can just feel really righteous and deeply justified. And Mercury in Taurus is wanting something solid and real, something with weight. But Pluto in Aquarius will be exposing the larger power patterns moving through the collective thought. So the invitation this week the sky is giving us is to slow the mind enough to distinguish our reactiveness or reaction from wisdom, and distinguish between urgency and necessity. What feels urgent is not always necessary. And that persuasion, be really aware of persuasive narratives. They don't necessarily mean truth. Okay. And we can also distinguish, if we slow down, between emotional certainty from genuine understanding. So it's a week to notice where the language is heating up, where beliefs are becoming protective, and where pressure is building in the collective field. And to look where deeper motives are moving underneath the surface of speech, our own, others, and in the general collective narrative. So as we move through this week, I think the main thing to watch is the relationship between conviction and clarity. Mars in Aries can push us to act quickly. Jupiter in Cancer can amplify the feeling that something precious needs to be defended or protective. And Mercury in Taurus is wanting something grounded, steady and real. Pluto in Aquarius presses on those deeper patterns, moving through ourselves, but also moving through collective thought, technology, society, and the narratives and stories that we're sharing. So it doesn't need to be looked at as a negative sky, but just a charged one this week. Tension. The sky, the archetypal symbolic nature of the sky this week can bring courage, truth-telling, strong decisions, and the energy to move something forward. Creative tension, people. That's what I'd look for. But it can also bring, we've got to be aware, it can bring heated speech, fixed opinions, emotional certainty, and pressure that's disguised as truth. So I think the sky is inviting us this week to pause before we react and listen beneath the surface of worlds and ask whether our sense of urgency is really wisdom or whether certainty is really understanding. And that's what I have for you this week. As usual, take what is resonating. We've all got different charts, so there may be different parts of this quite complex and challenging sky. They're probably different for everyone. Leave the things that don't resonate. Go within what holds weight out of my narrative, okay? But use the astrology as a symbolic mirror rather than it's a prediction of how this week will be. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.